Hello, and welcome back to Text Appeal, the podcast. I am your host, Travis Villalpando. I wanted to create this episode, which will focus heavily on a neuroscientific topic, because of course my vision for this brand is not one that is laser focused on any particular discipline such as psychology, neuroscience, or philosophy, but instead I aim to integrate these fields into a more comprehensive picture. The last episode was pure psychology, but today I will be elaborating on what we mean by stress from a more physiological perspective. Stress is a common term that everybody surely has a basic grasp on the meaning of it, but really there is much to know about what stress is and why we experience the phenomena of stress at all. Today's episode will take on the perspective of an evolutionary biologist and is directly inspired by pages 124 through 128 of Robert Sapolsky's Behave. Thank you for tuning in, and may you learn some neurobiology today. Well, life is of course stressful, and this is somewhat an inescapable reality, especially if we are being technical about the term. The definition of stress in the context that I will be using today is the body's internal coping mechanism for returning to homeostasis when an event has occurred which knocked it out of its original homeostatic state. Using this definition, we can further use the term stress response or physiological stress response. Our physical body responds to a stressful situation by altering the neural and hormonal state of the organism so that the physical state of the body is more apt to respond to the situation in an appropriate manner. Put more simply, our body releases many different chemicals in response to situations when our life is threatened. The human stress response is especially complicated, though, because the anticipation of a threat may cause an inappropriate stress response in us humans, which can have many harmful consequences in the long run. Allow me to take apart all of this science jargon in a few different sections moving forward from here. We will first be looking at why stress is necessary, followed by the difference between acute and chronic stress responses, and lastly, I will speak on the nature of stress as explained by the inverted U-curve. More on this concept later. Okay, so first, why is stress necessary? And also, why do we have a stress response at all? Wouldn't it be much nicer to just always be chilling in the homeostatic state all day long? I mean, mind over matter after all, right? No, wrong. Stress is not something that we can live without, and I mean this at the level of handling predatory threats as well as maintaining the integrity of our body's structure. According to Sapolsky, a stressor is, quote, anything that disrupts the homeostatic balance. So for example, a couple stressors could be an uncomfortable temperature, becoming hungry or thirsty, or a predatory threat approaching. These are all different forms of stressors for really most animals, and humans are included. The list of stressors in our own lives is unbelievably long, so this definition is perfect in making our understanding of a stressor a little deeper. To illustrate these points, here are some of the common situations in which a stress response is necessary or appropriate. The first one being effortful output at the physical level, right? So when we're engaging in exercise, which is something that we modern humans do so that we can get our body moving, our ancient ancestors would likely have had to put out a lot of effortful output simply to survive day to day. And of course, as humans, even in the modern world, we always have places to go and places to be and people to see. So of course, we need to put out effort, and our body needs to put out effort. Thus, stress needs to be a part of the equation of putting out effort. Stress response also leads to feelings of anxiety, which signal that a threat is in the vicinity. So once again, if we look back to our ancient hunter-gatherer ancestors, and if you really look at the animal kingdom as a whole, it's of course important that you have this stress response, and then the way it manifests in our mind, right, our mental state, is feelings of anxiety, and we're uncomfortable and we feel in danger, which signals us to act, right? So that's really important that we have a stress response. This is why we can't just be in the homeostatic state all day, because this is a dangerous world. Now, our world is a lot less dangerous than the hunter-gatherer world per se, but that doesn't mean that there aren't still, a lot of dangerous things that are in our day-to-day lives. So stress response leads to anxiety, which signals that a threat is nearby. And then lastly, a really important one, which I'll talk about with the inverted U curve later, we have to optimize our stress so that we can perform at a high level physically and cognitively. So as I'll explain later during the inverted U curve, there's a sweet spot for the amount of stress we want to encounter in order to perform at our highest level. Okay, so now that I have briefly established stress as a vital component of everyday life and the sustainability of life, now we can look at the negatives of a faulty chronic stress response. Before I get into this, just know that when you do undergo a stress response, something has to be sacrificed in terms of your body's energy being allocated towards certain functions. For example, when you sprint for a short time at full effort, your body must allocate so much energy to your muscles and to your lungs and to your entire respiratory system so that you can consume more oxygen. And then this means that your immune system, your digestive system, and your cognitive abilities are going to be suppressed for a short time. This is why, of course, when you are sick, you cannot perform as well physically or cognitively because your immune system requires more energy during a period of recovery from an illness. So, for example, what I mean to really illustrate here is that the stress response is necessary for effortful output of physical energy, such as a hard sprint, but something has to give, right? That's important to know. Now, a chronic stress response is really dangerous. And of course, chronic just means a persisting problem. And when used in terms of healthcare, we can say that a chronic stress response is like a persisting problem that has harmful effects over time. Sapolsky states in Behave, quote, "During stress, long-term building projects such as growth, tissue repair, and reproduction are postponed until after the crisis," unquote. The crisis example he uses is a lion chasing you or, a lion chasing a zebra, whereas you are going to be in full fight or flight mode, and your glucocorticoids are going to be secreted like mad through the adrenals. I will clear this up in a moment, don't worry, but the point is, whilst the stress response is active, you cannot learn or grow in simple terms. This means that if you are being stressed out all the time, inappropriately, then your ability to have a healthy body and mind is terribly limited. A classic example of this is somebody who grows up in a really dangerous household or neighborhood, and we see that the chronic, stressful environment in which they inhabit actually damages their ability to learn in school and even stops important brain development that affects their ability to make better and more rational decisions. If you are interested in neuroscience, then the following will be a technical explanation, and this will prove useful to you. If not, just bear with me through this section real quickly. These things are really complicated, but you need not know all the details to get the point of the episode. Okay, so I'm going to use the lion example once again, just as Dr. Sapolsky does. So, imagine a lion begins to chase you in the wild. Well, first, the sight of the lion being the predatory stimulus, is going to activate your amygdala. Amygdaloid neurons then stimulate brainstem neurons, which inhibit or stop your parasympathetic nervous system whilst mobilizing, or, mobilizing just meaning activates your sympathetic nervous system. In doing this, epinephrine and norepinephrine, also known as adrenaline, is released into your body. The amygdala also activates the paraventricular nucleus, or the PVN, in the hypothalamus. This causes what is called corticotropin-releasing hormone to secrete as well, which then triggers the pituitary gland to release what are called adrenocorticotropic hormones, which finally, and most importantly, stimulate glucocorticoid secretion from the adrenal glands. Mind you, this is taken almost directly from Behave, not my work. I could just not put it in any better terms than him. The point is, glucocorticoids and adrenaline are what cause you to be able to exert so much effort in a stressful situation. If you lacked glucocorticoids and adrenaline, or for example, if you were deprived completely of food and nutrients and glucose, well, then you wouldn't be able to move, and thus the lion is going to kill you. So the awareness of a threat stimulus triggers this process. And at the end of all this neuronal projection around your brain and your nervous system being stimulated in different ways, you get this boost of energy in the hopes that you can save your own life. Okay, we're going to return back to English here. That's a lot of neuroscience jargon there. So Sapolsky further illustrates the point by saying, quote, reflecting its importance, this basic stress response to a threat is ancient physiology found in mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles. What is not ancient is how stress works in smart, socially sophisticated, recently evolved primates, unquote, aka human beings or Homo sapiens, the species that you are a part of. He then uses an example of how the acute stress response will of course save your life from a threat right here, right now. But if a 30-year mortgage activates that response inappropriately, then you will be getting killed slowly, and you will be miserable, paranoid, and anxious all the time. And this is really bad news, of course. So, of course, the best thing to do about this problem is to protect and to regulate your stress response and to regulate your hormones and your other vitals. The most practical way to do this is to exert energy in the form of exercise, to eat a whole food diet that avoids a surplus of processed foods and foods that are highly concentrated with trans fats and sugar. Also, to prioritize sleep habits, as sleep is the great health equalizer for all of us. And lastly, and often goes, I would say this is the underrated pillar of health, but it's definitely making a huge impact in our culture right now with what we call the mindfulness movement, something like that. We want to develop a practice that encourages relaxation, mindfulness, and stress relief, such as meditation or breathing exercises. Me personally, I like to do cold exposure. This is a positive form of stress, to go into water that's around 50 degrees, right? You're going to get that kind of shock to your body. You're going to be forced to control your breath. And this is positive stress. This is good stress, just like exercise. So this brings us to a really important concept that everybody should be aware of. This concept is called the inverted U curve. This curve is pervasive, meaning it shows up absolutely everywhere in our day-to-day lives. Allow me to explain. So here's just a technical definition of what the inverted U curve is. So the inverted U curve describes a relationship where something initially improves with increasing factors such as effort or input, and then it's going to reach a peak optimal level, and then it's going to decline with further increases. So this is where we get the age-old saying, everything in moderation. And this model works for stress too. What we would say technically is that there is an optimal amount of stress that will help us perform our best, meaning that not enough stress will leave us lethargic and unable to perform, while too much stress will wear down our minds and our bodies until we eventually deteriorate prematurely. Now, here are a ton of examples in which the inverted U curve shows up in your own life. So basically, just to make sure you know what I mean by the inverted U curve, take a U and flip it upside down. Now, the x-axis, or the axis along the bottom moving from left to right, represents how much of something is being put in, right? Or how much effort is being exerted. And then on the y-axis, y to the sky, the one going up, is going to be measuring performance or optimal levels. So the higher on the y-axis, the better. And then, of course, on that x-axis, we're looking at the amount of something, or the amount of effort being exerted, or the amount of stress that you're experiencing, right? So we have learning and arousal. So of course, optimal learning, the higher we go on that y-axis, is going to correlate with the amount of arousal. So how awake you are, how aroused you are, how much stress is you're experiencing. And so there's a sweet spot, because not enough stress, you're going to be real low. The beginning of that inverted U, that upside down U, is going to be real low. But then as you approach more arousal, you're going to be improving, and then there's a peak, and then it falls back down when there's too much stress. You're too stressed out, you can't learn a thing. But if you're too tired, you can't learn a thing. So this is where the inverted U curve shows up. Another one would be drug use, such as alcohol for the social benefits. So for example, a lot of people drink alcohol because alcohol is kind of like a social lubricant. So you might say, this is really just me kind of using an example from my own mind here, although this is true, but I don't mean to use the numbers that I'm going to put out as the ones that are like actually in the literature. So for example, if you have a little bit of anxiety and you want to go out to a party and you want to kind of kick back, be loose, and be socially, you want to use alcohol as a social lubricant so you could be a little bit more free and less anxious. Now, once you catch that buzz, you're going to be feeling quite good. So maybe you catch a buzz around 2 to 3 beers, because with no beers, you're your own anxious self. And then, 2 to 3 beers in, you have a buzz, you're feeling good, you're feeling a little more confident. And so then that would actually, this is one benefit of alcohol. There are very few of them, but this is definitely one of them. And so you get to enjoy the benefits of the buzz, because as you input more alcohol into your body, you're going to gain more social benefits. However, too many beers, right? Once you start to get into 9, 10, 11, depending on your tolerance, you're going to just be completely belligerent, and you're actually going to be suffering the consequences of your actions as somebody that's out of control and belligerent, and you might commit crimes and your inhibitions are totally lowered. Okay, and then a couple more that I'll run you quickly through is motivation in work. So for example, if you're unmotivated to work, there's no motivation you have in your work, you're not going to perform well at all. But there's really kind of a sweet spot here, because we know that throughout your day, we can't put out effort, to the max, pedal to the metal all day long at work, even if you like your work, because it will burn you out, right? And I'm not saying that you can't work extremely hard. You can. It's just that you may burn out if you're just always on the pedal and you're never relaxing. So there's an inverted U curve associated with motivation and work. This is also effort in physical activity. So for example, your exercise regimen, how fit are you? And then based on how fit you are and your fitness goals, you're going to want to push yourself to get into that optimal state of physical activity. So with weightlifting, you're trying to engage your muscles so that they'll grow. And you're trying to engage your muscles and stress your muscles so that you can, fill them with blood, right, in the name of hypertrophy, so that you can grow your muscles so you could have stronger muscles. And so in order to do that, you need to pick up a weight that is challenging for you, but is not so heavy that you're going to experience injury or that you just simply can't move it. So there's an inverted U curve there. And then also really just like the consumption of even nutrients. Like, for example, if sugar as an athlete is not the devil himself, right? Sugar is a good thing. We want to have our glycogen replenished after hard workouts, especially, full effort sports such as wrestling. In between wrestling matches, me and all my teammates and every other wrestler, we consume carbs and sugar to try and replenish our glycogen. But the thing is about that is that not enough sugar in your diet, especially when putting out a lot of effort physically, is going to mean that you don't have your glycogen is not replenished. But then if you eat far too much sugar, you're just going to crash, and then that's going to be a whole bunch of problems if you overdo it, right? So basically, I'm talking about something fairly obvious here. Too much of a good thing is often really bad, and not enough of something that can be generally viewed as bad example given being stress, is also really bad. So really, to close out this episode, I want you to think about your relationship to stress. I want you to critique yourself and ask yourself, okay, am I always stressed out to the point where this is actually a problem and it interferes with my life? And what does that say about me, my personality? And what can I do to kind of tackle this problem? Or I want you to see, am I a little bit too relaxed? Am I a little bit too complacent? Do I not allow myself to seek discomfort in the name of growth enough? So you're really going to be looking at this inverted U curve as something that can guide you toward optimal and maximizing your effort so that you can reap what you sow. So yes, I'd love for you to not only appreciate this episode for what it is, but to also do your own research about the inverted U curve, because it shows up absolutely everywhere. And once again, I want to give a shout out to Robert Sapolsky's Behave. It's an amazing book if you're interested in evolutionary biology or neurobiology and psychology and even philosophy, right? Where are you grounding your philosophy, the scientific part of philosophy? And so there it is. There you have it. This was tons of fun to make. So thanks for tuning in. This is Text Appeal, and I am your host, Travis Villalpando.